The NBA has a new collective bargaining agreement. Some of the rules for team building are changed. They're pretty significant. How do they impact the Pacers in their current situation and in their next steps? Well, I'll explain it to you all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, diving into the new NBA CBA. Lots of requests for this topic from listeners, and it's a big one for the Pacers and really every team. The rules in which teams can build their team will be changed, and they will be changed to make the league better and better and better going forward. And it's collectively bargained, so it's agreed upon by the players and teams. And I think the big players and owners, I should say. And I think that is always something to know, right? If it seems like a lot of these changes are beneficial for teams or players, think about that there's something else that the owners got that they're really excited about. And we'll talk about that in the third segment. But the big thing to note with all these changes, first of all, we don't have the official CBA yet. At least I don't. A lot of people got a term sheet, like 100-something page document about all the changes. Those went to, teams, agents, etc. Media, us, we got an 11-page PDF with high-level explanations of the changes. So I can at least talk about them and go through them, but some nuances are needed in the full CBA. That said, I think the important reminder to start there with this is every change affects every team, right? Like through the life of this CBA, it's a 7-year agreement. There's an opt-out after 6 years. Spoiler alert, they will opt out after 6 years. Just like this one. Every rule affects every team because just because a rule doesn't directly affect a team right now, maybe it affects a team they're trading with at some point, or maybe in 5 years when their salary is for a team is higher, it affects them. Like in general, every team is affected by every rule. But something interesting is when a CBA changes, the rules can impact teams at various levels of team building in different ways. And that's where the changes matter. And there's, I'm assuming, a whole committee of people whose job it is to review how each CBA, once it comes out, will affect each team uniquely or independently and what that looks like and all sorts of stuff like that. So diving into this from a Pacers perspective is, I'll get to some of my takeaways in general. But if you're under the cap right now, if you're an under the cap team or a team trying to stick together, you're looking pretty good. You're happy with these changes. And that's not just the Pacers, but they are not uniquely, but in a pretty good, this will help them, I think. It gives them a few more tools. It gives them more trade flexibility. In the future, if this team sticks together, the current core of the Pacers sticks together for a really long time, then they could run into some hurdles. But that's so far off that it could be the end of the current CBA, depending on how things go. But I want to start with, I kind of group these changes into 3 kind of groups. One being the things that I think are Pacers specific given their current situation. One that is kind of general to the league and applicable to the Pacers. And then the third segment's on these aprons that are a big deal that won't be a big deal to the Pacers this year, but could be with teams they interact with and could be for them in the future if they become a tax team or a team willing to go that high. So the first one is actually something fascinating because it would have changed the way the Pacers' most recent season happened. And that is the salary floor. The NBA's minimum salary rule is different, which I think is completely fascinating and yet makes a ton of sense. So the Pacers, if you remember, were below the salary floor on the first day of the season. They were below the minimum team salary on opening night. They didn't cross it until they gave Miles Turner that renegotiation extension. The new rule is the team has to reach that floor by day 1 of the regular season. If they don't, they distribute the difference to the NBA, and the NBA sends it to all players, not just the players on the own team, but all the players, right? So, like, the punishment before was you just pay your own players more money, which still isn't great, but it's fine. Now it goes to everyone. So, it's not as good there. You don't get a tax distribution, and you can't ever dip below the floor once the season does start. That's also new. So that effectively you have to hit that before the season starts. The Pacers would not have been able to do what they did last year and just skid under it until they decide to figure out what to do. That would not have been possible, right? That's a big change. And for the Pacers specifically, they have a lot of cap space this summer. They have to use some of it, right? That is different than last year where they don't. They could have waited till the trade deadline or done a renegotiation or something. There were a lot of ways to get there. They have to by the opening night of regular season figure it out. I think that the tax distribution alone, that revenue is so much that every team will try to hit the floor, right? The punishments aren't like amazing, like shockingly strong, but I think every team, including the Pacers, will try to reach the floor by opening night as a result of that change. Pacers didn't hit it until January, really February 1st of last season. So that's a big change and suggests the Pacers will have to use some of their cap space in some way, whether it's taking in a player in a trade or signing someone or something, a renegotiation again. And there's a million ways it could go, but they are going to hit the floor. The difference between them and the floor is not known until the lottery's over and things like that. So I can't get into that too much. I'll do a cap space breakdown on a future podcast, but that's a big change. And another part of the Pacers' busy summer. They have more draft picks than available roster spots, and they have to hit the floor. There's a lot of math that ain't mathing for the Pacers. It's going to be a busy summer for them, and that's just another rule that matters here. Another sort of Pacers unique one. This could have been an every team one, but not every team's going to have the MLE going forward, which is a new change for the league. If you're over the second apron, no non-taxpayer MLE, but the MLEs are all changed. The mid-level exceptions are all bigger, right? The non-taxpayer mid-level exception is much bigger, 7.5% increase. The taxpayer mid-level exception is getting a little bit of a bump. And the room mid-level exception, which is the one the Pacers will have this summer, is getting a pretty significant bump. It'll be about 7.6 million estimated value in year one this year. So what the room exception is, if you're a team that has cap space, which the Pacers will this summer, this is an exception outside of your cap space. So if you spend all your cap space, you can then use the room exception separate. That could get you over the cap or something like that. The Pacers use the room exception to sign Kyle O'Quinn and Justin Holiday in the past if you want some kind of value gauge for what that is. So now the first year value of that is all the way up to 7.6 million. It was only like 4.5 million for Holiday and O'Quinn. That's a big jump. That's a big quality of player improvement, right? More money for players. That's great news for players. And for the Pacers, that's effectively an extra spending tool that they now have. They would have had the tool anyway, but now it's bigger, stronger, larger, whatever word you want to use. And a new difference here, the taxpayer mid-level exception and the non-taxpayer used to be able to go 3 years for taxpayer and 4 years for non-taxpayer, but the room exception can only go 2 years. Now that's 3. And that's another big takeaway from the CBA is a lot of these exceptions, because teams are kind of encouraged to keep their own with these new second apron rules. There's a lot more ways to get bird rights on your own guys, and that's one of them. So the Pacers could sign their room exception signee, if they use it, to a 3-year deal starting at 7.6 million. That in total could end up being a 23-ish million dollar deal after raises. That's a significant tool to add a player even after using cap space. And those big exception changes, that's going to be fascinating 2 seasons from now. This isn't implemented next year, but you can trade those exceptions for players who fit into them starting in 2024-25. That is fascinating. Every team getting basically a trade exception is going to be so interesting. That's not something unique to the Pacers, but I wanted to include that because I was talking about those. Something else unique to the Pacers, because they own second round picks. There's a second round pick exception. So you can, basically a 3 to 4 year contract slot will be made at specified salary amounts, likely similar to the rookie scale. But for second round picks, this is basically helpful for a team like the Lakers, who signed Max Christie to a 2-year minimum deal because they have no exceptions to pay him more. Same with Austin Reeves. And then it's harder for them to give them money that they're worth if they're better in 2 years. This means that, again, those guys can have full bird rights, like I said earlier, at the end of their deal. For the Pacers, who could have 2 second-round picks, this is noteworthy, although it's TBD on if they use those seconds on players who need 3 or 4 year deals. The other thing here that's unique to the Pacers, because they're under the cap, or tax basically is more important, the matching salary rules for trades are bigger, much bigger. That's going to be absolutely fascinating to see. But instead of 175% plus 100,000 for trade exceptions, it's now 200% or a $5 million difference at the lower salary of trades. It doesn't really matter a ton to get into the nitty gritty of that. It depends on a lot of other factors involved in the trade, including the team the Pacers are trading with. But the Pacers already could have, because of their cap space, made some pretty lopsided trades. But this means even after they use their space, they could still make some fairly lopsided trades, which is absolutely fascinating. So I think that those are the rules that are So a lot of teams under the cap have those benefits in the same way the Pacers do, but not every team is in that situation. So those are a lot of the rule changes that are unique to the Pacers, but they'll have more trade flexibility, more flexibility to add players with exceptions, and they have to use their space. I think those are the three changes this summer that directly could impact what the Pacers do or are able to do, or will literally just make their summer look different. Let's look at some of the other big picture stuff that every team in the league, regardless of situation, essentially is going to be able to utilize this summer or going forward, and what that could mean for the Pacers specifically. Some big ones involving some of the younger Pacers coming up as well, and contract extensions. Someone like Buddy Hield certainly cares about that. Before we talk about that, though, let me quickly talk to you guys about eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, ironically, big news day in the NBA on Thursday, as well as the playoff game. That's first. Locked On Lakers for the loser's perspective from Game 2. Locked On Warriors for the winner's perspective. JaMychal Green is starting a playoff game. Steph's not even having to score like that much, although he still scored a lot. He was passing, and the Warriors dominate Game 2. Locked On Warriors, Locked On Lakers. To hear more from an awesome playoff series. So on the Pacers front, the CBA, fascinating stuff. I mean, I'm uniquely nerdy about all this. I hope this stuff is interesting to people because it matters a great deal to know how these rules affect the Pacers and what they're able to do this summer. And I think a big thing that has been hurting a lot of teams and a lot of players is extension rules, right? You can only offer a player 120% raise. A lot of times that's not enough to reach a value that is fair for their salary. It's kind of silly that extension rules are tied to a player's previous salary because typically a player you want to extend is playing well, which means they're worth more than what they're currently paid. Well, it's still the case that it's tied to previous salary. Now it's 140%. You can offer a player 140% of their previous year's salary in the first year of an extension. So, for example, Buddy Hield at $18 million, that's almost like a $7 million bump. In theory, they could give him like $25 million a year on an extension. They shouldn't and won't do that, but they can now do that instead of a much smaller 120% extension. For someone like Domantas Sabonis, for example, with the Kings, who would be extension eligible now, this gives them Kings a better chance of extending him, although he could probably still make more as a free agent. Jaylen Brown, a guy who's a big winner from a rule like this. And in general, anyone who's improved some, but not a ton. So that's significant for vet extensions. TJ McConnell, I guess, is a guy that could benefit from this, although I don't know if the Pacers would be lining up to give him a big raise in the future. So this isn't likely something the Pacers will deal with right now, but they have a lot of guys who this could be relevant for pretty soon. And again, Buddy Hield, extension eligible. McConnell will soon be as well. So there's a lot of factors involved with that one. A big one for the Pacers and for any team that has a rookie coming off a rookie scale deal, rookie scale contract extensions. Usually in the past it was designated rookies can get 5-year extensions, so a 6-year deal in total. That Halliburton will ideally for the Pacers get that. We'll see if they can negotiate to that. But for every other non-designated rookie, it was only 4 years extension added on beyond their extra deal. Now, every rookie scale extension can go up to 5 years. So Aaron Nesmith now this summer can negotiate a rookie scale extension. So starting in 2024-25, he could sign up to a 5-year deal with the Pacers on top of that final year of his rookie scale deal. I don't think the Pacers are going to be committing 5 years to Aaron Nesmith, but they now can, and that's helpful. And what was it harming to do that? That was always kind of silly to me that 4 and 5 year differentiation even existed in the first place. This would have been relevant for Jalen Smith as well, but he had that weird team option declined by Phoenix situation, so not relevant for him. But also, this could matter for Mathurin. This could matter for Jackson. This could matter for Duarte. All the guys on rookie scale deals. Whoever the Pacers pick in the first round this year, if anybody, right? All those things will matter being able to offer that extra year to any of them, right? And the flip side of that is what I talked about, the designated rookie there. They got rid of the limits of designated players on teams that could have mattered for a team like Cleveland. But now the Pacers should not be worried about making Tyrese Halliburton a designated rookie extension guy, because who cares? You can have as many as you possibly want. It was stupid that there was a limit on that in the first place. It's like you don't want to have too many good players, basically. It was dumb. So that's fixed, and Tyrese Halliburton should be a designated rookie and get 30% of the cap as soon as possible. This will affect every team, and this one's going to be fascinating. I'll be so curious how this gets implemented and what ripple effects could come from this. This one's been reported on widely. It's in the document. 65 games played requirement for players to be eligible for league awards, MVP, all that stuff. Halliburton would not have been eligible for anything this season. A lot of awards and stuff would have been changed. That's so fascinating. I get that the NBA is trying to incentivize players to play. I don't think this will really do anything. I'm not going to lie. We'll see. Perhaps it does, because I think players want to play, and it's more so teams and doctors that are on the cautious side, and I get why, and I'm not criticizing anyone for making the decisions they do. We'll see if this actually changes anything, or if it's just the league saying, we're trying, we swear. But that is so fascinating to me. If you're a team that has a player who's potentially going to make All NBA, right? And making All NBA could make them eligible for a designated veteran extension, a big raise, a big extension. But if they don't make All NBA, they're not going to be eligible. If you're a team, you might kind of want your guy not to play 65 games. They're not going to hold anyone out intentionally, and that would give them such a stain on their rep that it might just be horrible in general. But I'll be so curious about the ripple effects of this. Or there are some the languages in this that says, there will be exceptions if you just barely miss it, or for various things. But I thought that one was fascinating. We'll see what ends up coming from that. But 65 games played required for awards. Halliburton, for example, would not have been eligible this past season. This was already something that's in place now from a COVID change, but now going forward, only 10% max increase in the salary cap every season. So a new TV deal would be great for the league. A lot of money coming in. That would slowly be implemented in 10% bumps in the salary cap instead of one huge one that happened last time. That's how Durant was able to go to the Warriors, for example. But with raises being maxed out at 8%, that basically means, that's helpful for teams to potentially add cap space every single season, but also good for players to potentially want to be in free agency more often. There's not as big of a TV bump, which is significant, right? I think you heard Kevin Pritchard talk about the artificial barrier of 2025 for a lot of players, and there still is going to be a maximum possible cap jump that summer. But I think it's noteworthy the NBA put in those limits so that that barrier isn't as prohibitive. We'll see. This is something that could matter for the Pacers if they want to sign a restricted free agent. The timeline for matching offer sheets, it used to be 48 hours, 2 days, and that was really until midnight on the 48th hour, so longer than that, is now down to 1 day. It's shorter. There's still like the physical process and all this loopholey crap that's annoying, but the offer sheet period is down to 1 day now. If you'll recall, last year the Pacers signed someone to an offer sheet in DeAndre Ayton, and the Suns matched in about 10 minutes. The reporting came out in 10 minutes. I don't know how long the actual paperwork took to file. It made the Pacers look dumb for doing it the way they did it. It's just how it is. Had it taken a day, it wouldn't have looked so silly. They handicapped the odds, whatever. I don't want to relitigate that. But now that period's only 1 day anyway, which is good. Teams should not have to have their cap space tied up in a player that's not on their team. And they could be using that money on a different player. And the players want money to go to players in general. So that makes sense to me. Good change by the league. This is a fun one. Teams can now negotiate with their own players right when the finals end, not with external, not their own team players. I'm trying to find the exact language on this one in the PDF, but I think that's here it is. Negotiating with players on team. Beginning on the day following the date of the last game of the NBA Finals, each team will be permitted to begin negotiating the terms of a player contract with any player who finished the season on the team's roster. Finally, I mean, what was the point of that rule? Like, you can't negotiate with a player who's under contract on your own team. That made no sense to me ever. So the Pacers have those three free agents: O'Shea Brissett, James Johnson, George Hill. Once the finals are over, they can finally start negotiating. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see this. If you're not, you didn't. I just did air quotes because that stuff obviously starts way earlier, wink, wink. But now I wonder if we'll see agreements be announced or leaked much earlier because of that. And that makes sense. Who cares? There's no games being played anymore. Everybody's figuring out the money in their next home, and the draft is in 2 weeks. That makes sense. That just is smart business. The last one here that'll affect every team, Pacers included. Training camp, you can now have 21 guys on your roster for camp. And I think the impetus for that was teams can now carry 3 two-way players. So the third slot, that's nice for the Pacers. Now they could, if they want to keep Kendall Brown next year, they have an extra tool to do it, plus 2 other slots to do something like that. I'll be interested how teams handle this. I think it makes kind of sense to do like 2 project players and one like, hey, we might need this guy for depth, but who knows what they'll end up being. So an extra guy in camp, that's great. More bodies to look at, more young players to evaluate, or potentially veterans to evaluate, and another two-way slot to get those guys more money and help the G League a little bit. Exhibit 10 deals also come with a bigger bonus now. So those fringe NBA guys, very happy with those rule changes. There's more to this than all this, but this is the stuff that I think the Pacers care about the most. All that stuff you just heard, I think, there's some other stuff that matters a little bit, or it depends on how the Pacers summer goes, could impact them, but that's the stuff I feel like impacts the Pacers specific team building situation the most. But these aprons are the crazy change, the thing that the owners are probably the happiest with from a team building perspective. And they really matter for teams the Pacers will negotiate with. They're so important to what the next 6 years of NBA team building are going to look like. Let's close out talking about those. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Make your second listen Locked On Bucks, because they did it. Mike Budenholzer fired by Milwaukee. Wasn't sure this would happen. I guess it makes sense. I guess it really does make sense. But championship coach fired. Vogel gone. Ty Lue in Cleveland gone. Now Budenholzer gone, winning a title. Not necessarily this long-term hold with your team. Nick Nurse gone. That's 4 championship coaches who have been fired from the team they won it with. Crazy how it's all going down. Either way, Mike Budenholzer, free agent coach. Milwaukee Bucks on the search. Kane Pittman will have more at Locked On Bucks. Pacers perspective, the aprons. The biggest thing about the CBA change, the thing that got leaked first, because this was exceedingly significant. I won't say this is a hard cap. It's not a hard cap. So the way this works is there's 2 aprons. This is the big system change. It's the first thing you see in the system change section of the CBA media summary document, right? There will be 2 apron levels set above the tax level. So if you go above the tax, you're paying the luxury tax. If you reach this first apron level, which this coming season is going to be $7 million above the tax line, then there's some differences in the stuff you're able to do. For example, your salary matching in trades is way smaller than everyone else's. You can only take in 110% of what you send out in trades. This coming season, that drops to 100%. The following season, your TPE amount is different. And for buyouts, if someone who makes more than the taxpayer mid-level or the non-taxpayer mid-level exception is bought out, you can't sign them. You cannot sign buyout players if you're over that first apron. That's huge. That is massively significant to the buyout market, to where those players can go, to what those teams can sign, to their depth. Right, that's all massive. So that's all the rule changes. I was trying to say that all the prohibitions. That would have sounded stupid, but that's all the things they can't really do, at least according to this list, that are significant. We'll see if there's anything else in the actual document, but that's a big deal, right? Crossing that line, you lose a little bit of flexibility. You're still good. You can still, in general, make trades. You can still make most signings. You still have your own MLE. Like, you're fine to add to your team and be good. I think teams will cross that line at least sometimes. The Warriors and Clippers probably certainly will next year. But then there's the second apron. This is crazy. So this is the list from the NBA. The following transaction rules will apply at the second apron level. Teams will be unable to use the taxpayer mid-level exception. Wow, that's nuts. So you can't externally sign an expensive player anymore. Like, that has been a huge tool for these teams forever and ever. That's how the Warriors got like DiVincenzo and some of their best players through recent seasons. Joe Ingles to the Bucks wouldn't have been able to happen this past season. I'm sure the Clippers used it on somebody that I can't remember. Trade-wise, so once the next season is over, right, TPE is gone. Those teams have to do 100% salary matching. They can't trade cash to another team anymore, and they can't do sign-and trades anymore. So those are it's so hard to add external players. You can't sign them at this big amount. You can't trade cash for someone cheap. You can't do a sign and trade. You basically can sign minimums and your own players. The BAE is not listed, so perhaps that is another tool. Although you'd be hard capped and you're probably over the hard cap. No BAE, ignore that. So if you go over the second apron, it's really really hard to add to your team in any way, in any sort of capacity that is significant for improvement. And because it's so prohibitive to then add other talent or even make important trades, it's going to be really hard for teams to exceed that, especially because if you're over that limit for long enough, the new draft pick rules are here. If you're over the second apron level in at least two of the immediately coming 4 salary cap years, you'll have a pick freeze. You'll have a draft pick 7 years out freeze. It goes to the back of that round. You can never trade it. If you dip back under that for the next 3 years, it unfreezes, but you'll still have it, so you could never have traded it in that span. So it is crazy how this goes. The frozen pick, meaning it can't be traded, is super significant 7 drafts from now, and the fact that exceeding it in 2 out of 4 years means it goes to last in a draft unless you dip under it for the next 3 years means these windows to even exceed the second apron are really short. So that is all, of course, fascinating. And I'll be exceedingly curious how that all affects teams that are already over it, right? They can't just hard implement that. They will a little bit, but I'll be curious what that actually looks like. But for the Pacers, they're not even close to that number, right? Right this second, they don't really care about those things. In the future, if Tyrese Halliburton gets a bunch of money, and hey, Benedict Mathurin's also an all-star, he needs a bunch of money, and oh, by the way, they won the lottery, and Victor Wembanyama needs a bunch of money, then yeah, they might care at that stage. But right this second, that's not a big deal to them directly. However, it is if they want to make a trade with the Clippers or make a trade with the Warriors or any team that's above the second apron potentially coming up. Those two stand out just because they're such expensive rosters. There could be more. The Nets, the Bucks. I don't think the Lakers could. But in general, there are teams that can exceed it, and trading with those teams is harder. It's different, right? The 100% salary matching rule, 110% next year, but then 100% is really hard. That's really tough, especially if they're trying to get a player of a specific value. That's why I think I heard this loophole somewhere else. I don't remember what podcast it was being talked about, but it makes a lot of sense. And I've kind of bounced it off of some people that know this stuff. It's like, someone kind of good is going to sign a 3-year, $150 million contract. That's not a great player, but it's going to be a fully non-guaranteed contract. And then, at some point, the guaranteed amount will be exactly enough for them to make the exact trade they want to make, and then that player will get cut, and they'll get more money than they would have in a different way. I don't know. That's just a random creative way that this could work, but you could see some funky deals because of the second apron, right? It's very confusing. It's very complicated. Confusing's wrong. If you know all the rules, it's not confusing. The complication it adds to trades means other teams will have to be clever, know what every team situation is. And so trade rules being different for every team has always been a thing. But now it's even more extreme what the differences are from one team to the next. And that's what's important to the Pacers. So I'll be curious what teams are willing to exceed this, or if teams are just saying, no, that's basically a hard cap for us. We can't improve our team anymore. Once we reach that, we're stopping there. That wouldn't surprise me at all. And if that does become the case, I bet owners are pretty happy about a hard cap. There was a lot of reporting from Woj about this upper spending limit, that being a thing owners potentially wanted along the way in the CBA negotiation, and players would never go for that. So maybe this is their compromise. But it's pretty crazy that between, guaranteed last pick, and it's really hard to trade or sign anyone that isn't a minimum or do all this stuff. It's so prohibitive. I keep using that word. At least I've used it correctly the last 2 times. That it's going to be fascinating to see if teams are willing to go over it, and if they are, how much are they, and can they work around the things that it stops you from doing. So if teams that are over it in the coming season start trading off some cheaper guys or maybe not re-signing guys that you think are good, that's probably why that these changes are going to be a factor and also that kind of stuff. And if you're the Pacers who have space, hey, come here, guys. We have space to bring you in and give you that sort of money. We'll see what comes of that. And we'll see what other loopholes come of this stuff, right? The non-guaranteed thing, now that I'm thinking about it, was from, I think Dan Feldman on Dunked On was the first person I heard think of that. But things like that, right? All sorts of the unintended consequences that come from all the rule changes will be fascinating to see in the coming years too, because I can only read what the high-level rule changes appear to be, but I can't tell you the nitty-gritties without the CBA or what the consequences, like I just mentioned, will be. But I think the high level stuff is you expect to see a lot of slightly longer deals, like bird rights level deals, 3-year deals. Outside of, I think you'll see a lot. I think basically 2-year deals will be few and far between now. A lot more 1, 3, 4, 5s. And then for the Pacers specifically, expect them to use their space this summer, and they have more tools to add to their team. And yeah, it's going to be fascinating. If you have questions about all this stuff, because it's a lot of information and potentially very confusing, I'm on Twitter at Tony R. East. Changed my at if you didn't notice, because I don't just cover the NBA anymore. I also cover the WNBA. But that's where you can ask me questions about this. This podcast is at Locked On Pacers to hear all of our latest episodes. Next week, more draft player content, trying to get some of these top end of the lottery guys done before the lottery. So Scoot Henderson, we're talking about him on Monday. Tyrese Halliburton season review, and a couple other fun things coming for you every day, or so you like to tune into every single show. So thank you guys so much for listening. Hope you had a fantastic week, and we will see you on Monday.